Good afternoon and welcome to another Bible study on prophecy, the end times, and the book of Revelation. I want to thank you so much for joining me today as we get into the book of Revelation once again. Last time we had gotten through Revelation chapter 10, we have begun to see many things that are unfolding in the book of Revelation. We have seen the timeline of events as they seem to be laid out in the book of Revelation. We've combined that with the study of Matthew chapter 24 and 25, with the study of the book of Daniel, with looking at some other things that we have pulled in out of the book of Ezekiel. When you start combining all of the things that the Bible says and you lay all of the timelines together, it seems like they are unfolding the way that we have been presenting them. Now, there's room for debate, there's room for conversation to really discuss, is this the way it's going to happen? But all accounts or all indications based upon how we are reading it seems like it makes the most logical sense. Again, it's open to interpretation and debate, and it's open to really wrestling with. This is one of those conversations and topics that I think people should wrestle with. Don't get so firmly entrenched in your position that you're not willing to hear what other people have to say, what other ideas are, but make sure it's all grounded in Scripture. Don't add anything that's your own ideas and thoughts. Make sure that you have a scriptural basis for what it is that you believe. We want to have a biblical worldview. We want to filter our lives through the filter of the Bible. We want to make all decisions in life based upon the Bible. And as we really study the end times events, we want to make sure that we have biblical basis for what it is that we are trying to understand. So today we come to Revelation chapter 11. We have gone through chapters 1 through 10 in the book of Revelation thus far. We're getting a pretty good indication of the timelines that are beginning to happen. What's interesting in all of this is that this idea of Revelation this is heaven's perspective of the timeline. So this is the heaven's perspective. So this is, John is having this revelation and he is looking down from heaven and he is seeing these events unfold. If you look at the book of Daniel, for example, Daniel is really from the perspective of what the beastly empire and the Antichrist, this empire is going to consist of. We looked at in the book of Daniel the coming back of a nation or a kingdom that had been utterly destroyed. They came back into existence. That was the analogy of the statue that we saw. This beastly system that was revived. The book of Daniel really shows what the beastly empire is going to do, how they're going to conquer. And then we have the book of Matthew, and the book of Matthew is really interesting because this is Matthew 24 and 25. This is the perspective for the disciple. Now, who is the disciple? Well, that is the follower of Christ. If you are a follower of Jesus, you've accepted him into your heart, you have turned away from your sins, you have been saved by grace through faith, you have become a disciple of Jesus. Now, the book of Matthew is the disciple perspective on all that's going on. The disciples came to Jesus. They asked him, how will we know? What is the sign of when you're going to return? What are the events of the end? Well, he gives the disciples perspective on the events that are going to happen. The disciple, that's you and I, this is the only timeline. These are the only signs that we see. These are the things that we are going to see. The revelation events that John is describing, we won't see these events unfolding as they are unleashed. We'll see the evidence of the events, but we won't see it because these are from the throne room of God looking down upon his creation. So we can get an understanding of what will happen, but our best indication is the book of Matthew. These are the things that we can look for, and these are the things that we can see. So really it's interesting as we study through Revelation, we have three timelines that are all coming together, that if you put all of the clues together, you get a pretty good indication of what the end times events are. And we have looked at this timeline of the final 7 years. The final 7 years are really the final week according to the book of Daniel. These are the final 7 years. We know in the book of Matthew that middle mark, that 3.5 year mark, is the kickoff to the Great Tribulation. This is when Israel is really under attack. So Israel becomes the focus, and you have Jerusalem in particular. You have a temple that has been recreated, rebuilt. You have a beastly empire coming into Israel, taking over and really creating havoc in that area. Then you have all of these events coming up, culminating in finally the end, and the end will be the return of Christ and the wrath of God that will be poured out. Once that happens, you have the kickoff to the 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus. This is where he takes over, and King Jesus is sitting on the throne from that point forward. So people have asked me, are we there? Have the events started to happen? And really the answer to that is, I don't think we're there. I don't think that we have reached that 7-year point yet. I don't think we're in that timeline yet. But I think we're close. I think if you look at the analogy and that Jesus uses, that's pretty amazing. If you look at these as the beginning of labor pains, this is when the contractions, if you've ever had a child, or you are a husband of a wife who's had a child or seen that, you know that this is the point of contractions. This is where the contractions are going to start. Now, the contractions from point A, where it starts, to point B, where the delivery is, the contractions just intensify. They're going to get more intense, more extreme. So Jesus is describing these end events as being like labor pains, and it's just going to intensify and get worse as we are marching toward the end. So from the beginning of the 7 years to the end of the 7-year period, it's going to go in intensity and frequency. Those two things are going to happen, and it's in velocity as well. It's going to go quicker and quicker, all of these events that will happen. I think that we are somewhere outside of the 7-year period, somewhere outside here, and we are experiencing the what in labor would be the Braxton Hicks contractions. These are false labor pains, but they're still labor pains. It's like the body is trying to warm itself up and get itself ready until it gets to the point of contraction. Now, when contraction happens, that's when the events really start to unfold. But we are outside of that, and it's almost like we're feeling the Braxton Hicks pains, the warm-up process. The body is getting itself ready until you actually have the birth of the new age. And the birth of the new age will be a beautiful thing. We'll see the Lord's return, and we will see the wrath poured out, and we will see him set up his 1,000-year millennial reign upon the world. And so that's going to be a beautiful thing. We have seen this picture so far. We have seen the seals. We've looked at that. We've looked at seals 1 through 7. Where do they fall in this timeline? Well, your guess is as good as mine. My perspective is that at least seals 1 through 5 are over here toward the beginning. These are all happening, but they could be spread out. I mean, they don't have to necessarily be all bunched up together. And it seems like, it appears that maybe seals 6 and 7 happen more toward the end of the events, though maybe you could put 6 and 7 here in the middle. You could put 6 and 7 somewhere here. Possibly, I don't know, but it seems to be more toward the end, because they really match what Jesus said in Matthew 24 when he talks about the events that are going to happen, especially as we get to the end. The geological events that are going on and the astronomical events that are happening. It seems like it appears there. Now, once seal number 7 is broken, that unleashes the trumpets. The trumpets are the events that are the sounding of the warning that the end is coming. Now, in my opinion, trumpets 1 through 7 are going to happen pretty quickly, in pretty quick succession. Where do they happen? Do they happen along here? Well, my perspective is they're going to happen right here near the end. I'm not going to say when that exactly is going to be, but they're going to happen right near the end. But we know that 6 and 7 could happen anywhere in this period. There's a period of time that it could happen, but my personal opinion as I read it, it's going to happen near the end. Now, we have covered covered what trumpets 1 through 6 are. We covered them in chapters 8 and 9. We have these incredible geological, astronomical events that are happening. We have this meteorite shower that is going to hit the earth. Then we have a larger meteor, like a huge mountain that is coming down and is going to hit the earth. Then we have a asteroid itself that is going to hit the earth. This is going to cause incredible destruction, incredible chaos that will happen. Then we have the fifth trumpet, which is the falling from, my opinion again, the falling from Satan from heaven down to earth, that Satan's kicked out of the spiritual, and all of his power then is transferred finally to the Antichrist, and then the Antichrist with great power and veracity attacks the people, torments the people who do not have the seal of God. Now, the seal of God is not the seal of the Father God. This is corresponding to the mark of the beast. It's the seal of a God. And that is very common in Islamic practices, that you're going to see that if you do not agree with what we say, we are going to create torment for you. Now, the torment is going to be horrific. People will long for death, but they will not find death. It will be a horrific time, incredible battles. Then you have the final battle. That is the sixth trumpet, and this final battle seems like it is this 200 million person army that is coming in. Again, in my opinion, if you look at the colors that are represented, it very easily could be a China-Russia coalition. And if you look behind the scenes today, they are building coalitions between China and Russia. They're getting very friendly. China's getting very friendly with the Middle East. So is Russia with the Middle East, with Iran especially. And they are getting very friendly with each other. So we could see this incredible army that is happening. Now, they could be going against the Antichrist beastly empire. That's what it seems to be, this army that is marching from the east. John describes all of these events with references that he probably could not make sense of, but if we read them, we can understand them as military weaponry that we have today. That's really the things that he is describing. He describes things like fire and smoke coming out of the mouths in this third plague. He is talking about them having horses riding on them with breastplates of fiery red, blue, and yellow. The heads of the horses were heads of lions. Out of their mouths came fire and smoke and brimstone. Really, I believe what he is describing, he's going to be describing in that chapter tanks, helicopters, airplanes, missiles, all kinds of weaponry that we have in modern day warfare that John is describing. So trumpets 1 through 6 have been discussed. So we've talked about 1 through 6. Now we have trumpet number 7. We will get into trumpet number 7 just a little bit in Revelation 11, but instead we are going to also be taking a quick jump back in chapter 11 to this moment in time, and we are going to see something that is going to be happening from that point to the end. It's going to cover a period of what's called 1260 days. If you do the math, 1260 days divided by 30 or 360 days, because there's 30 days in the Jewish calendar, 30 days in a month for 12 months, that's 360 days. That comes out to 3.5 years. So we have an event that's going to be happening in chapter 11 that's going to fit right into the narrative of this moment in time right here. This is the moment in time that these events are going to take place. This is going to be interesting. We're going to go through some of it here today. So let's go through Revelation 11. So John has just finished chapter 10, although he did not number any of these chapters, so he didn't know it was chapter 10. But in chapter 10, we see this transition period where John takes this little scroll from the angel's hand. He ate it. It was sweet as honey, and he swallowed it, but it made his stomach bitter. And he says, the angel says to him, you must prophesy again about many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. And so there's a little transition point here that really is taking us back a little bit in time to what's covering in chapter 11, leading up to the seventh trumpet. So it's almost like he's backtracking just a little bit to the 3.5 year mark, and then he's going to carry it forward to what's going to happen right at the seventh trumpet sounds, and we're going to pick up the seventh trumpet in verse 15 of chapter 11. But let's go through the first 14 verses. It says, then a measuring rod like a staff was given to me, saying, get up and measure the temple of God and the altar. So when he says measure the temple of God and the altar, it sounds like he is referring to a rebuild. So it looks like we have a rebuilt temple that is going to take place in Israel according to this. It seems like this. Unless he's referring to the heavenly temple of God, but it doesn't seem like it. It seems like he's referring to an actual temple of God and the altar, and count those that are worshiping in it. But do not measure the court outside the temple, leave it out, because it has been given to the nations, and they shall trample the city for 42 months. What is 42 months? It is 3.5 years. So if we look at the final mark, the final 3.5 years, we have, this is where Jesus talks about it in Matthew. This is where Daniel comes in. This is the mark. This is called the Jacob's trouble in the Old Testament. It's Jesus calls it the tribulation, the great one. This is the period of time for 42 months or 3.5 years, and he'll also refer to it in just another sentence, 1260 days. This is the time that the beastly empire comes against the people of God in Israel. So Israel has now been attacked. They will, so the temple of God is there, the altar is there. That's why it seems like it's a rebuilt temple. Don't measure the outside of the court in the temple, leave it. It's been given to the nations, which almost kind of says, if you look at the temple, the way that the temple is structured, you have different courts. You have the Holy of Holies, and then you have some outer courts that happen in the temple as well. And these outer courts are for different purposes and different reasons. Now, what he's almost saying is the temple, maybe just the altar has been rebuilt and everything else has not. So that could indicate a few different things. It could indicate that the rebuilt temple is not the full temple. It's only a partial temple. It's only the Holy of Holies, because everything else outside of it has been given to the false nations, the other nations. Now, that could possibly say that with that, you have a possibility that the Holy of Holies could be rebuilt next to where the mosque is today, the dome in Israel. It could be built there, because not the whole temple doesn't have to be built. Only the Holy of Holies has to be built, because the temple of God, just measure that one, and the altar, count the ones that are worshiping there. So maybe it is a subset of the entire thing. Maybe it's a smaller amount of the temple that is being built, not the entire thing that is being built, because the rest of it has been given to the nations. Now the nations are going to trample the holy city for 42 months. Now remember, this is the attack of the coalition against Israel. This is what we've referred to as the beastly empire. This is the Antichrist forces that will attack Israel and will trample Israel for 42 months. During this time, there's going to be something else, though, important that's going to happen. It says, and I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days dressed in sackcloth. So God is going to have 2 witnesses that are going to be there prophesying during this time. So here you see, in a time of a rebuilt temple, not the full temple, just a partial temple, in my opinion, the Antichrist empire will maybe allow this temple to be rebuilt, and they'll have a portion, the Jews will have a portion of it. They will start worshiping, start sacrificing in it, but they won't have the whole thing, because the rest of it, the outside of it, has been given to the other nations, the ones that are going to trample Israel. Now, they're going to trample it for 42 months, for 1260 days, for 3.5 years. And there will be on the scene 2 witnesses that will come on the scene during this time, during these final 3.5 years, 42 months, 1260 days, because God is going to give them authority, and they will prophesy for 1260 days. And what will they prophesy? Most likely they will be prophesying of Jesus. They will be leading people to come to Christ during that time. Now, you remember, going back just a little bit, we have 144,000 Jews that will become followers of Christ during that time. And we talked about those, and we'll talk about those again because those are going to come up again. But during that time, the prophecy, they will be witnessing for 3.5 years, and they're going to see maybe that's how these 144,000 get saved through the witness and the prophecy of these two witnesses. Now we don't know what the prophecy will be. It could be that the trumpets of God are blowing. It could be that God's wrath is going to be poured out, that it's going to happen just shortly. Make sure you're preparing yourself, getting yourself ready. It may be witnessing and finding these Jews come to Christ during that time. We know that they will be on the scene. They will be dressed in sackcloth. Now, the question becomes, who are these witnesses? Well, really, we don't know. We're just speculating. The speculation that we have of who these witnesses are really two. Again, this is a speculation. This is an opinion that is held by many theologians, but the two witnesses that people often think of are Enoch and Elijah. Now, why Enoch and why Elijah? If you look at the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 5, verses 23 and 24. In fact, let me turn to that and read that for you here today. If you look at the example in the book of Genesis, Enoch was a person who did not die, but apparently was taken up into heaven. It says of Enoch in chapter 5, verse 23 and 24, it says that Enoch walked with God continually for 300 years after he fathered Methuselah. Now, this is before Noah and the ark. It was a very wicked time and a very wicked place. There was 1,000 years between creation and the time of Noah. It was incredibly corrupt, they were very much into, there was an explosion of world population. There was demonic worship. There was sexual perversion. Jesus says that our days, the end days, will actually parallel the time of Noah, that age where there's sexual perversion, there is increasing world population, and there is a demonic influence and worship during that time, and that was happening during the time. Enoch was living in that time because Noah happened in chapter 6 and 7, and this is in chapter 5, verses 23 and 24. So he walked with God continually for 300 years, and he lived for 365 years total on the earth. And it says, and Enoch continually walked with God. Then he was not there because God took him. Now, what does it mean that he took him? Well, it's two possibilities. One is, well, he just died and he went to be with God. But the more accurate translation there is that God took him up to be with him, that Enoch didn't actually die. He was just taken into heaven to be with God. So that's going to be important. So this is a person, if we look at this, that we could say did not die. So did not die. So it's a very real possibility that Enoch is one of those people. Then we have Elijah. In Elijah, we know of Elijah that he was perhaps the most powerful of all of God's prophets in the Old Testament. But we do know of Elijah in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. It says of Elijah, it says he was walking along with Elisha, and Elisha took the mantle of Elijah, meaning he took the teaching of Elijah, the mantle, which was both literal and and it was a figurative thing that he took the mantle. As they were walking along and talking, behold, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven, and as Elisha was watching, he cried out, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. Then he saw him no more. And so he then took up the mantle of Elijah, and that happened in the book of 2 Kings, and you can look at chapter 2, verse 11. So what is another characteristic of Elijah? Well, he did not die. Only two examples in the Bible of two people who did not die. Everybody else has died. Everyone. Even Jesus himself hung on the cross and died. Then he was resurrected into the newness of life. A brand new body was given to him, a resurrected body, and then he ascended into heaven. But he did die on the cross. Enoch and Elijah, the only two who did not die. So it makes sense that everybody does have to die. And if these two did not die, then they did not fit the mold of everybody else in humanity. And so it would make sense that these two become the two witnesses that return for God's sake. Now, how do we also know this? Well, there's a prophecy of the coming back of Elijah. In fact, the Jewish people celebrate and look forward to the coming back of Elijah still to this day. Part of the Passover ceremony is the looking for Elijah to return. In fact, in the Passover ceremony, they will often leave a chair empty. It's a place that is set up in a place setting for Elijah, thinking that Elijah might possibly return. Now, in the book of Malachi, in Malachi, chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, or if you're reading from what I'm reading from here, the TLV version, in the TLV version, it's chapter 3, verse 23. In the TLV version, it's sometimes, they don't follow, sometimes the chapter breaks the same way that all the other translations do. And that's just because in the scrolls, they didn't have the chapter breaks, but they have it as chapter 3, verse 23. Regardless, it's the same verse. And here's what it says. If either 4, verses 5 and 6, chapter 3, verses 23 and 24, he says this, and I'm going to write 23 and 24. So listen to these words, and this matches this. It says, "Behold, I am going," and this is God saying this, "Behold, I am going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of Adonai." Now, what is the great and terrible day of Adonai? That is the return of the Lord and the wrath of God being poured out upon the world. That's called the great and terrible day of the Lord, or it's called the great day of the Lord, or the day of the Lord. That is always a reference to the wrath of God being poured out upon the world. So listen to this. He says, "I'm going to send you Elijah, the prophet, before the coming of the great and terrible day of Adonai. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers. Else I will come and strike the land with utter destruction." So to me, it sounds pretty clear that one of the witnesses for sure is Elijah, because it is prophesied about in the book of Malachi that Elijah will return right before the great terrible day of the Lord, before the day that he is going to strike down with utter destruction, and he will turn the hearts of the children to their fathers and the fathers to their children. This is what is going on in this idea of prophesying as a witness, turning the hearts of the people before it is too late, which again makes sense that it could possibly be the 144,000 that are being turned back to God before it is too late, before they have no more opportunities. And we know that number 144,000 because we have looked at it in previous verses, in previous chapters, but we'll also get back to it again. So in this time of the final 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years, we have two witnesses that are coming on the scene. They're going to be there for 1,260 days. They are going to be a witness during this time. They are going to turn the hearts of the people according to the book of Malachi. Elijah most likely is one of those, and it makes sense that Enoch would be the other because he did not die, and everybody has to die. It's a part of humanity, and those are the only two that did not die, and so very likely they could be the two witnesses because they're going to die in all of these events that are taking place. Okay, well, let's go back to the book of Revelation and keep going here in verse 4, because we've got a lot of verses we got to get through, so let's get through these. "These are the two olive trees and the two menorah that are standing before the Lord of the earth." So what is the reference here? We have two olive trees and the two menorah. These are just the symbols of Israel. So these witnesses they have to be Israeli. They can't be from Ohio, for example. They have to be Israeli, unless it's a Jew that was born in Ohio that's gone back to somehow. But these are coming down out of heaven. It seems like Elijah, Enoch. They have to be Israeli. These are the two that are standing before the Lord of the earth. Now, if anyone wishes to harm them, they can't, because fire comes out of their mouths and consumes their enemies. So that could be taken both literally and figuratively. Fire comes out of their mouth. It could be a literal thing that would be wild beyond wild to see that event happen, or the fire could be the words that they use, and that those words consume their enemies. Or some curse that is being spoken over them that causes their enemies to walk away or their enemies to drop and die. Don't know how that's going to look, but somehow these two witnesses they're going to live the entire time. Nobody's going to be able to harm them. They are going to keep going, and if anybody tries to harm them, then they are going to be in turn killed. So if it's because that's what it says, if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. Now these two have the power. Now this is what's going to be fascinating. If you remember Elijah, again, this is why it makes sense that Elijah is one of those, but he prayed and there was no rain, and then he prayed and there was rain. These two have the power to shut the heavens so that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. So look at this. 3.5 years, 1,260 days, 42 months, there will be no rain on Israel. Now, I don't know if that means no rain upon the entire planet, or if it just means no rain on Israel. But we know that the heavens will be shut so that there is no rain, and this was the power that Elijah had in the ministry that he had during his day. So again, Malachi prophesies that Elijah will return. He will return before the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will return before the Lord utterly destroys and wipes out everything. He'll be on the scene. He had that kind of power before. He'll have that kind of power again during these days, during this time, and he will have incredible power during this. And it says so that they have the power to shut the heavens; no rain may fall during the days of their prophecy. So that's 1,260 days, and they have the power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they wish. So we have here that they are striking the earth. So this is, again, is that this is going to be localized to Israel as they strike the earth in Israel, and the plagues happen in Israel. These are very reminiscent of the plagues of Egypt during the time of the Exodus, the plagues that happened that Moses had. So that kind of power, they're going to possess that kind of power. They can turn waters to blood. They can strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they wish. They have really free reign here as often as they wish. They're not just saying, they're not being controlled. It's as often as they wish it to happen. They can strike the earth and this kind of plague. And so it seems like it's going to be a worldwide biblical plagues that are happening, or it could just be localized around Israel, but whatever it is, these two witnesses have incredible power in the things that they are going to accomplish and the things that they are going to do. That's what's going to happen during this time. Let's keep going. Verse 7. Verse 7, when they have finished their testimony. So the idea of testimony is when they have finished their witness, when they have finished their work, when they have finished leading people to the Lord. Once they have finished, the beast that rises from the abyss will make war on them. The beast, the Antichrist, that rises from the abyss is going to make war on them and overcome them and kill them. Now you remember, Elijah and Enoch did not die. They were the only two in the Bible that did not die. It just makes sense. Here is where they will die. It's appointed unto man once to die, then the judgment. And so everyone has to die. So that, again, just makes sense that it could really be Elijah and Enoch. But once they are killed, then they will take their corpses, and their corpses will lie in the open street of the great city. Now, what is the great city? The great city that is figuratively is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So that where was their Lord crucified? Their Lord was crucified in Jerusalem. So in Jerusalem is where they're going to be placed. Their corpses are going to lie in the open street of the great city. But this city is now called Sodom and Egypt figuratively. What are the references to Sodom and Egypt? Well, Sodom was a great place of immorality. perversion, sexual immorality, sexual perversion. But it wasn't just sexual, it was religious immorality, religious perversion. And Egypt was a place of oppression and a place of slavery, so a place of bondage. So you have Jerusalem, who now, Jerusalem, which was the place of God, is now an immoral, oppressive, and bondage city. It's a perverted place. It is not what God had designed. This is the place where their Lord Jesus himself, so this is a reference to Jesus, where their Lord was crucified. Now some from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their corpses for 3.5 days, not allowing them to be placed in a grave. Those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them. They will celebrate and send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So these two have been such a burden, a thorn in our side, that there will be a gigantic celebration at their death and their no longer being in existence. And so much so that they're going to have a great party and celebration and even the giving of gifts to one another in different parts of the earth because of this. And so these two have been a nuisance to them. They have been a problem to them. People can't dare touch them, because if they do, they're going to get killed. So they're able to speak and witness and proclaim truth during that time, and they will see people come to the Lord. But eventually they are going to be killed, and their corpses will lie there in Jerusalem, the place of immorality, perversion, oppression, and bondage. People will celebrate the death of these because they didn't want God. This is a final rejection of God. So God, if you think about this, God is giving the warning signs to the people through these trumpets, and he is speaking specifically to people through these witnesses. This is the last opportunity. This is the last chance that the nations have, that the people have, to turn to the Lord. And if they don't, it will be too late. Now, we know that many will not, and they're actually going to celebrate when these two people are killed because they don't want to hear anything that is contrary to what they think themselves. They want to hear only what they think. They want to do what they want to do. They want to be involved in what they want to be involved in. And these two people were speaking contrary to that and making them feel bad about themselves, and so they are celebrating when they die. And so that's the events. That's the two witnesses that are going to happen. Let's keep going. Verse 11. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who were watching. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud while their enemies watched. This is the most miraculous thing that you could ever possibly see. How this could not make people turn to the Lord is beyond comprehension. It's beyond me that people would not turn to the Lord in repentance at the moment that they saw this. This is very much the picture of Lazarus when Jesus said to him, "Lazarus, come forth," that Lazarus came forth. The breath of God was breathed back in, and now they are being brought up into heaven in a cloud, and all of their enemies are watching them in this incredible event that is taking place at that moment. And people, not wanting to turn back to God is just, again, mind-boggling that they would not want to turn and follow him. But they're not. They just won't. They will not listen to reason. They won't listen to, and they won't understand and believe the things that they see even before them. Verse 13. At that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past. The third woe is coming. So now, again, this is getting all of these things back together. This is getting us back on track, that these are the events that are happening during that time that we have seen these woes. The first woe had passed back in chapter 9, verse 12. 2 woes were still coming. Now the second woe was past, and now only the third woe is left to come. Now we have, what is the third woe? It is, finally, we have reached the point of the 7th trumpet. It is ready for the seventh trumpet to sound. Now, the seventh trumpet is interesting because we are going to have verses 15 through 19 that we're going to just read through real quickly, and that'll be the sounding of the seventh trumpet. And then we're going to have kind of a little side note, a little like backstory commentary in verses 12 and 13 and half of 14, and then we're going to pick it back up to what's happening at the seventh trumpet. So it's kind of a backstory that's going to happen starting next week as we get into chapter 12. So now we have the seventh trumpet that is going to happen. Let's read about the seventh trumpet. We'll read this pretty quickly and wrap it up for today. Then the seventh angel trumpeted, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of this world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his anointed one, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders seated on their thrones before God fell on their faces. They worshiped God. So they were saying, look, it is time. It is over. It's come to an end. They have had their last opportunities. They saw the last miracle of the two witnesses. They heard the two witnesses for 3.5 years. They saw the last miraculous thing of them coming back to life after 3.5 days. They saw them taken into heaven. They saw the earthquake that killed 7,000 people, and some repented and gave their hearts to the Lord. But now it's over. Now it's at the end. There is no more opportunity. Things are done at this point. Everyone in heaven, and we can't see this because these are heavenly events in the throne room of God, but the 24 elders seated on the throne before God fell on their faces. They worship God, and they were saying, we thank you, Adonai Elohi Zavaot, who is, and that's the Lord of the angels' armies, who is, who was, because you have taken your great power and you have begun to reign. It's time. Jesus' reign starts right now. We are taking control. The 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus is about to kick off. The nations were enraged, but your wrath has come, and the time for the dead to be judged, to reward your servants, the prophets, and the kedoshim, the saints, the holy ones, and those who fear your name, the small and the great, and to destroy the destroyers of the earth. So now it's time. Now it is the wrath of God. So we have seen the seals. The seals unroll the scroll. So the seals are wrapped around the scroll that is folded up and rolled together. We have the seals being wrapped around with strings and being sealed with wax seals. Those seals were all broken. When they were, the scroll was unrolled. They read off the judgment against the world. Now you have the trumpets. And what are the trumpets? These are the warning, the sounds of the warning. And they're going to be bad. No doubt about it. They are going to be bad. But this is not God's wrath. This is the warning signs that the wrath of God is coming. And now we have finally reached trumpet number 7. So we had seals 1 through 7. And seals 1 through 7, looks like seats, but it should have been seals. Seals 1 through 7 broke open the scroll. That led to trumpets 1 through 7, the final trumpet at the last trumpet, number 7. This is where God is going to unveil his wrath. The wrath has finally come. There's no more opportunities. He's going to pour out his wrath upon the destroyers of the earth, upon those who had rejected him, on those who had persecuted his servants, who had persecuted the prophets, the holy ones, the kedoshim, the saints, those who fear the name of God. They are going to finally be vindicated. You will be vindicated someday. You don't have to get revenge because God is going to get revenge. Don't worry about getting revenge. God will get it all for you. You will be vindicated here in the wrath of God that is going to be poured out upon the world. We finally reached that moment. As we reach that moment, God is again going to take a little bit of a pause, give us a little backstory, and pick it up again right in chapter 14. Go to verse 19, and it says this. And then the temple of God in heaven, and we're going to finish out because this is the end of the verses here at this time in chapter 11. But then the temple of God in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant appeared in his temple, and there were flashes of lightning and rumblings and clashes of thunder and an earthquake and heavy hail. So now we see all of this. It is just exploding. It's time to happen. We have reached the seventh trumpet. Now the seventh trumpet has been blown. Now it's go time. The wrath of God, the army of God is going to come upon the world. He's going to get his church out of the way, remove the church of God out of the picture, and he's going to unleash his wrath upon the world right here, starting in this. So in chapter 12, again, we're going to take a little bit of a backstory. Chapter 12, chapter 13, going back into some time and look at those, a little bit of chapter 14, and then in chapter 14, verse 14, we see the time of the harvest that is going to happen upon the world. So we have a little bit of backstory that's going to happen, and then we'll get back to this. So please don't lose your place, don't lose your train of thought when it comes to these, because we have, like I said, a little bit of a backstory that's going to happen in verses chapter 12 and 13 especially. Anyway. Incredible events. The wrath of God is finally here. It's going to be unleashed upon the world. God has been slow to anger. He has been holding back his wrath, but his wrath will come. God is a God of promises. He does not break his promises. He made a covenant with the world. He made a covenant with mankind. He has provided a way of escape, and that is through Jesus. He has provided us hope and healing and help from above, and that is in trusting in Jesus as Savior, in having faith and walking with him by faith. But those who have not trusted in him, who have not turned their lives to him, they are going to receive the wrath of God that is going to be coming upon the world, and it's going to start right now. As this incredible event in heaven, as heaven was opened, and this incredible flashes of lightning and rumblings and clashes of thunder and earthquake and heavy hail, it's time, it's go time. Things are going to be unleashed at this point in time. Well, that's all we have today. Thank you for joining with me. For those of you that stuck with it to the very end, I really appreciate it. I hope this is helpful. I hope you're learning something as we go through this, and I hope it's stirring in your heart, preparing in your heart that those are going to be scary times, but it's also going to be wonderful times because we have the privilege of seeing the Lord come. We have the privilege of crying out, Maranatha, to the Lord. Lord, come. Lord, come and rescue. Lord, come and get your church. Maranatha, may the Lord return very, very soon. Thank you for joining me today, and have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful week, trusting in the Lord, who is the ultimate protection, the ultimate reward, the ultimate shield to our lives as we go through all of the times ahead. Thank you, and I will see you back here next week for chapter 12 of the book of Revelation.